Excellencies, distinguished participants, I hereby declare open the 34th meeting of the 61st session of the Human Rights Council. We will now continue the general debate under Agenda Item 4 with the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I now give the floor to the representative of Alsalam Foundation.
Mr. President, we raise the Council's concern over the serious risks to the lives and well-being of prominent elderly imprisoned Bahraini opposition leaders and human rights defenders amid the current regional conflict and instability. Despite their advanced age and deteriorating health, they have remained arbitrarily detained for 15 years and subjected to serious medical neglect. 70-year-old opposition leader Hassan Mushaima suffers from multiple chronic illnesses and has recently experienced severe health deterioration, raising grave concerns to his life. Similarly, human rights defenders Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja and Dr. Abdul Jalil Al-Singasi continue to endure prolonged imprisonment and medical neglect despite their worsening health. These concerns are further intensified by the ongoing war in the Middle East. Recent Iranian missile and drone strikes have targeted sites in Bahrain amid escalating confrontation following US-Israeli attacks on Iran, placing these prominent prisoners' lives at serious risk. We call on the Bahraini authorities to immediately and unconditionally release these prominent opposition leaders and human rights defenders and ensure their safety and access to adequate medical care. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Association of Horus for Youth and Development in Qena for video intervention.
طلب منظمة حورس عن بلغ قلقها إزاء تدهور أوضاع حقوق الإنسان في سياقات النزاعات.
We express our profound concern at the human rights situation during armed conflicts. The situation of civilians is only further deteriorating in Sudan. There have been grave violations documented in the context of the conflict underway in flagrant violation of the principles of IHL. Our organization condemns those violations perpetrated by the RSF, as well as the attacks on infrastructure. These are grave violations of IHL and demand accountability. We call for as follows: 1, stop acts of violence against civilians; 2, guarantee access to humanitarian aid; 3, respect for IHL; 4, accountability for those violations. In Yemen, we also express our profound concerns at the situation of civilians against whom there have been grave violations of their rights, which are perpetrated on a daily basis. This requires, therefore, greater efforts to protect civilians. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Humanists International for video intervention.
Mr. President, I make this statement on behalf of Humanists International and Ateizm Derneği, the Association of Atheists in Turkey. Turkey calls itself a secular democracy. We call it what it is, a state that criminalizes disbelief. Article 216-3 of the Penal Code is a blasphemy law dressed as justice. It targets our organization, the only legally recognized atheist human rights body in the Muslim world. Our website is blocked. In 2014, our founder faced politically motivated convictions. In 2017, our board member Barbara Shansal was mob lynched at Istanbul airport, jailed under 216, while 12 of 13 attackers walked free. In 2024, the state's own religious authority filed charges against linguist Sevan Nishanyan for mocking the call to prayer online. That year, our volunteer lawyer Feyza Altun was arrested, travel banned, and given a 9-month suspended sentence for criticizing Sharia law on social media. In July 2025, Le Mans' editor was dragged off a plane in handcuffs over a cartoon. President Erdogan vowed he would answer for it. In 2026, the education minister launched probes against 168 writers, artists, and academics for signing a pro-secularism letter. Not for violence, not for hate, for works, for drawings, for signatures. We demand Article 216 repealed and equal protection for the right not to believe. Apostasy is not a crime. Disbelief is not a threat. Silence from this council would be. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Christian Solidarity Worldwide for video intervention.
Thank you, Mr. President. This statement is dedicated to the 12 religious and social leaders that have been killed or kidnapped by illegal armed or criminal groups in Colombia since December 2024. It is dedicated to Pastor Marwan Laura, shot and killed alongside his wife and 2 adult children whilst they were having lunch in Cesar apartment on the 29th of December 2024. It is dedicated to Pastor Ivan Garcia, killed in front of his 14-year-old stepdaughter whilst walking home from a Bible study in Magdalena department on the 8th of January 2025. It is dedicated to James Caicedo, Oscar Garcia, Isaid Gomez, Mariuri Hernandez, Nixon Peñalosa, Maribel Silva, Carlos Valero, and Jesus Valero, whose bodies were discovered in a mass grave in Guaviare department on the 1st of July 2025, 3 months after each disappeared on complying with summonses from a local armed group. It is dedicated to Father Carlos Saul Jaimes Guerrero, who was forcibly disappeared on the 17th of June 2025 in Cundinamarca. He was released after being disappeared for over a month. It is dedicated to Pastor Jose Otoniel Ortega, shot dead in front of his family at a New Year's Eve celebration in Magdalena department on the 31st of December 2025. Each of these cases highlights the specific vulnerability of religious leaders in Colombia, where they are viewed by illegal armed and criminal groups as a threat to their influence. CSW therefore calls upon the Colombian government to take action to reverse its changes to Decree 1066 and restore the specific protection protocol which addresses these unique needs and vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ingénieurs du Monde.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Vladimir Kara-Murza, and I'm honored to speak before this Council. I'm also very happy to be here, and this is not a figure of speech. 20 months ago, I was sitting in solitary confinement at a maximum security prison in Siberia, one of hundreds of my fellow Russian citizens imprisoned for opposing Vladimir Putin and his war in Ukraine. I'm here today because in August 2024, 5 democratic countries, the United States, Germany, Poland, Norway, and Slovenia, organized an international prisoner exchange that freed 16 people from Russia's modern-day gulag. Our exchange showed that democracies, when they stand on values and work together, are stronger than any despot can ever hope to be. In recent weeks, this very city, Geneva, has hosted talks on ending the war in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost as a result of this unprovoked, illegal aggression. No one can bring them back. But countries in this room still can save thousands of captives of this war. Ukrainian civilian hostages held in Russian custody, Ukrainian children abducted into Russia, Russian political prisoners jailed over their opposition to the war. Their release must be an essential part of any ceasefire agreement. We often hear about discussions over territories, sanctions, frozen assets, rare earth minerals. When the talks resume, isn't it time to put people first? I thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Human Rights Research League for a video intervention.
Thank you, Mr. President. During the last nationwide uprising in Iran in January 2026, several thousand protesters were shot on sight in the streets all over the country, and approximately 50,000 protesters were arrested. The Islamic Republic of Iran considers its own people the arch enemy of its rule, especially those brave young men and women who dare to defy the authorities and take to the streets to bring about change in their homeland. Human Rights Research League is gravely concerned about the lives of political prisoners in Iran, especially now during times of war. Political prisoners are in double jeopardy. They're considered enemies of the state by the government and were subjected to torture and deprivation even before the war started. During the recent bombings of Iran, reports indicate that prison guards leave their post when bombardment starts in order to run for cover and bring themselves to safety, leaving the prisoners locked in and without shelter. Prisoners are facing a severe shortage of food and medical supplies. Their families are not notified of their whereabouts or well-being, leaving the victims outside any protection and their families worrying for the fate of their loved ones. Human Rights Research League implores this council to pressure the government of Iran to release all political prisoners and ensure their safety. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Center for Inquiry for a video intervention.
نقف اليوم لنعبر عن قلق بالغ إزاء وضع.
Before I'd like to express our concerns at the laxity shown by this council since the Organization for Islamic Conference is present in this august assembly as an observer, even though its theories and doctrines run counter to the principles on which this council was founded. The Cairo Declaration that the OIC adheres to refers to Islamic Sharia. 12 countries are member states of that organization, 12 countries that condemn apostasy but through capital punishment, and they criminalize blasphemy and apostasy. Through this council, the OIC continues to be present and criminalizes blasphemy, which constitutes a violation of freedom of opinion, freedom of thought. We call for conditions to be established to allow this organization to be present as an observer. If it's to be present as an observer, it should, above all, adhere to the universality of rights, especially freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. And they should adhere to these freedoms without any discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of our FTP.
Mr. President, Turkmenistan continues to disregard binding decision of United Nations Human Rights Mechanism while victims of repression remain without justice. On July 9, 2024, the UN Human Rights Committee ruled in favor of Gildi Kerizov, confirming serious violations of fundamental rights. Yet the authorities of Turkmenistan have failed to implement this decision, while Mr. Kerizov and his family have faced intimidation and threats. Another deeply disturbing case is that of Jamal Bazarova, a single mother who was reportedly raped by investigators during pretrial detention to force a confession. No one has been held accountable. At the same time, political prisoners such as Iskandar Mulikov and Charikulov remain held incommunicado without contact with their families or access to independent legal assistance. We also recall the political prisoners who disappeared after the events of 2002, whose fate remains unknown. Furthermore, we are seriously concerned about the ongoing forced return of Turkmen citizens from Turkey, including those who have been expressed criticism of the authorities. These individuals are effectively being sent back to a country where they face a high risk of persecution, imprisonment, and torture. Mr. President, impunity for such violations cannot remain the norm. We urge the international community to ensure that Turkmenistan complies with UN decision and guarantees justice for victims. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Press Emblem Campaign.
President, last year, 165 media workers were killed in 31 countries. This figure marks a serious deterioration in the safety of journalists around the world. Despite numerous resolutions by the Human Rights Council, the United Nations General Assembly, and the Security Council, condemning all attacks against journalists. The main reason for this tragic record is the Israeli army's intervention in Gaza, which was responsible for the deaths of 60 Palestinian journalists. In addition to the direct victims of Israeli fire in Yemen, 15 victims, Iran 4, Lebanon 2. In total, the Israeli armed forces were responsible for the deaths of 81 media workers, half of the victims recorded last year. The PEC strongly condemns the systematic elimination of Palestinian media personnel and also deplores the fact that the Gaza Strip had been closed to foreign journalists for more than 2 years. We emphasize the media's affiliation with the opposing camp does not justify their elimination in many circumstances and in any context. Journalists are civilians and must be spared accordingly. In this respect, the war launched by the U.S. and Israeli on February 28 raises our deepest concern. We remain all belligerents that all media employees and facilitate
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Human Rights Now.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, currently the United States, with the world's largest military and economy, is one of the greatest threats to world peace and international human rights. On February 28, along with Israel, it began an illegal war against Iran with no clear objective that has been devastating for civilians, including the bombing of a primary school that killed at least 175, mostly children, widespread bombings in populated areas, and destruction of civilian objects and infrastructure. We support the joint statement by 13 human rights experts condemning the war's initiation and conduct, and we join its call for immediate ceasefire and independent investigations of attacks gravely violating international humanitarian law. The U.S. also conducted 622 military strikes in 2025 without provocation in 7 countries, attacked more than 40 civilian vessels, extrajudicially killing at least 157 civilians, sanctioned the ICC chief prosecutor, 8 ICC judges, and Special Rapporteur Albanese, obstructing their work. And in January, it bombed Venezuela's capital, Caracas, and abducted its president. The U.S. regime also deployed National Guard troops in U.S. cities to suppress protests, and immigration enforcement agents have shot at least 16 people domestically. We call on the U.S. government to end all illegal military actions and on all states to refrain from supporting or aiding and abetting grave violations by it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Society for Threatened Peoples. I give the floor to the representative of Imam Ali's Popular Students Relief Society.
Mr. President, today I speak about the most basic human principle, the right to life, a right that has been brutally violated in Iran. In a country where crimes against humanity are systematically implemented by Islamic Republic, brutality is the only thing is distributed equally among citizens. Death sentences and long prison terms are imposed on civil activists, intellectuals, and ordinary people. The horrific killings of civilians, including children and teenagers, in January 2026 stands as a dark stain on our era and a test of the international community's conscience. At this scale, this ongoing cruelty is no longer an internal matter. It is a threat to humanity itself. And now, the shadow of war deepens this suffering. Internet shutdowns by the Islamic Republic of Iran and the denial of safe shelters have trapped civilians in both physical and informational darkness. Political prisoners have been abandoned in unsafe prisons without adequate water, food, or medical care under active bombardment. The people of Iran are trapped in a deadlock that cannot be resolved without the engagement of international community. We call for solidarity with and support for the people of Iran. Replacing war with international humanitarian intervention under the auspices of the United Nations represents the only viable way out of this.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Coordination des associations et particulières pour la liberté de conscience.
We draw urgent attention to the systematic persecution of ordinary members of the Christian Gospel Mission or Providence between 2023 and 2026. Regardless of the charges against their founder, thousands of believers who were accused of no crime have suffered discrimination, stigma, and violence. After Netflix released a commercial documentary in 2023, followed by a sequel in 2025, algorithm-driven harassment escalated into real-world harm. In the island of Taiwan, ROC, 4,500 members faced doxing, threats, and public shaming. In South Korea, more than 160 sworn statements document exclusion that ignores the presumption of innocence. Economic boycotts destroy small businesses, educators, caregivers, and professors lost their jobs solely for their faiths. women endure misogynistic slander, and children were bullied in schools after teachers showed documentary materials. Families fractured under pressure, with cases of confinement and domestic abuse. Those violations of Articles 7, 12, and 18 of the UDHR demand immediate scrutiny and stronger safeguards against media-driven discrimination. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of International Career Support Association.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, imagine Baloch mothers desperately searching for abducted sons, daughters, and teenagers vanished in the night raid. In 2025, over 1,200 enforced disappearances were documented in Balochistan, including women and 75 students, with more than 1,000 still missing amid torture, killings, and silence. This fear enabled unchecked resource plunder. Recorded copper and gold go to outsiders, while poverty increases. Guadal fishing communities are displaced without consent, violating UN DRIP, ICCPR, and human dignity. Dr. Mehlan Baloch remains detained over a year since March 2025 for peaceful protest. How much longer will the world ignore entire people fading? This Council must act decisively. Launch fact-finding missions to Rikodik, Sindak, and Guadal. Demand Pakistan ratify the Enforced Disappearance Convention and ILO 169, repeal repressive laws, enforce 50% loyalty for affected communities, and condition funding on verified FPIC, local hiring priority, and proven poverty reduction. The Baloch cry out, do not let their voice vanish forever. Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Gulf Center for Human Rights Limited.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Gulf Center for Human Rights and Al-Qasd for Human Rights wish to draw attention to the execution crisis in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has for years been amongst the countries carrying out the highest numbers of executions in the world. Yet despite pledges from Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to reduce the use of the death penalty, the rate of execution has continued to soar to record levels. In 2025 saw the highest execution toll ever recorded in the country, with at least 356 individuals executed, surpassing the previous year's record toll of 345. This trend is continuing in 2026, with at least 39 individuals executed already. Of those executed last year, more than half were for non-violent drug-related crimes, with foreign nationals accounting for the vast majority. Their executions follow a pattern of abuses, including lack of access to court documents and legal representation. Other regressive trends in 2025 include the use of the death penalty to suppress freedom of expression, with Saudi journalist Turki Al-Jasser executed in June, showing the results of the international community's failure to deliver justice for Jamal Khashoggi. And 2025 also saw the resumption of the execution of child defendants, with Saudi youths Jalal Abad and Abdullah Al-Darazi executed in August and October, respectively, convicted of offences connected to allegedly attending protests when they were minors. This invalidates the authorities' claim to have ended the practice, and other child defendants remain at risk of execution. Governments should immediately press Saudi authorities to end these deplorable practices in violation of international human rights law. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Ellis Relief Foundation. I now give the floor to the representative of Youth Parliament for SDGs for a video intervention.
President, Youth Parliament for SDG wishes to express grave concern regarding ongoing and serious human rights violations in Yemen. Credible reports from UN bodies and independent organizations continue to document extrajudicial killings, targeted assassinations, arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, and torture. Civilians, journalists, political figures, and human rights defenders remain particularly at risk. The support of external actors, including the United Arab Emirates, in enabling armed groups responsible for these abuses, secret detention facilities, incommunicado detentions, and the lack of due process constitute clear violation of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. We recall that states have extraterritorial obligations and must ensure that their military financial, and logistical support does not contribute to human rights violations. Acting through proxies does not absolve responsibilities. We urge the Human Rights Council to strengthen monitoring mechanisms, supporting independent investigations, and ensure accountability for all perpetrators, regardless of their affiliations. Justice, accountability, and respect for human rights are indispensable for a lasting peace in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Chinese Association for International Understanding.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks for the Council's attention to the human rights situation in relevant countries. We express deepened concern to the human rights violations arising from civilizational conflict and confrontation, especially certain countries preach the ideology of civilization supremacy, apply double standards on human rights, even interfere in other countries' internal affairs under this pretext. Chinese Association for International Understanding is committed to promoting exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations, upholding the shared human values of peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom. We have organized a number of side events on promoting human rights through civilizational exchanges. Mr. President, the diversity of civilization is essential to the development of human rights. We urge UN member states to abandon civilizational bias, respect each civilization and their own path of human rights development. We suggest that the Council continue to pay attention on this issue and call on civil society organizations from all countries to participate in cross-civilizational exchanges with us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the World Evangelical Alliance for Video Intervention.
Mr. President, the World Evangelical Alliance draws the Council's attention to the growing insecurity in Nigeria, driven by religious and ethnically motivated violence, resulting in internal displacement crisis. Our churches report repeated attacks on Christian villages, churches, and faith leaders, as well as the forced abandonment of Christian farming communities under the threat from armed Fulani herders. These are part of a continuing pattern of violence which disproportionately affect Christians, but not only. Schools have also been attacked and hundreds of children abducted, placing their safety, education, and future at grave risk. While acknowledging the most recent effort being made by government to respond, we call on Nigeria to take effective, immediate, and more proactive measures to prevent further attacks, to ensure protection of vulnerable communities, to provide adequate assistance to internally displaced persons, and to guarantee safety of children in school. Thousands of people have signed a petition urging the international community to provide robust protection from violent militant attacks, ensure justice through fair prosecutions of the attackers, and to bring healing and restoration to all affected communities across the Sahel. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development.
Mr. President, we call for the Council's attention to the human rights situation in India and Pakistan. In India, anti-minority rhetoric against Muslims has fueled violence and discrimination. Bulldozer justice amounts to collective punishment and undermines equality before the law. Ethnic minorities, particularly from the northeastern Kashmiris, face continued violence, including the 2025 killing of Angel Chakma in Dehradun. The use of counterterrorism laws to target defenders and journalists, including Khurram Perez, Ifan Miraj, and Umar Khalid, reflects a broader pattern of criminalizing dissent. In Pakistan, Balochistan remains a major human rights crisis, with enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings persisting under a kill and dump pattern. Peaceful protests have been met with live fire, mass arrests, and network shutdowns, including reprisals against human rights defenders like Marwan Baloch. Cyber-terrorism provisions have been used to criminalize peaceful expression, including in cases against human rights lawyers Iman Mirzari and Hadi Cheddar. Situations in India and Pakistan require urgent international action, including by this Council, to prevent further violations, protect minorities and civil society, and ensure accountability. We thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of International Educational Development.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to draw the attention of this Council to the increasing risk of mass and summary executions of Kurdish civilians in the Islamic Republic of Iran. At a time of growing internal unrest and rising external pressure and public calls from Iranian authorities to kill, we are deeply concerned about massive use of capital punishment by Iran against Kurdish people and other ethnic minorities as a tool of intimidation and to silence dissent. We are also extremely concerned about reports indicating that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are using civilian locations in Iranian Kurdistan as protective shelters, thereby placing civilian lives at serious risk. We strongly condemn the missile and drone attacks targeting camps hosting Iranian Kurdish refugees in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Under international law, the minorities have a right to protection, and the international community must act urgently to protect the Kurdish people and other oppressed nations in Iran. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Sangsi Patriotic Volunteer Association.
Mr. President, I'm Bowie, an associate professor at the Law School of Southeastern University. As an expert of the national right to development, I speak today on behalf of the International Patriotic Pact Organization. We note the High Commissioner's update on Venezuela. Examine such human rights crises. We must address a systemic external destructive factor, unilateral hegemonism discussed as a national priority. The mobilization of international sanctions not only severs the economic lifelines of the targeted nations, but also forces the termination of normal international commercial and arbitral proceedings through non-armed jurisdiction. Such practice artificially create development crises, blatantly depriving development nations of their rights to life and development. Therefore, IPPO strongly advocates the international patriotic concept that love one's own country without harming other nation interests. True patriotism should never be built upon depriving others of their dependent space. We urge the Council and the United Cyber Force of International Justice to stand firmly against the hegemonic abuse of unilateral sanctions. We call on the international community to defend international fairness and the rule of law, and to safeguard the equal right to development for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Peace Brigades International.
Mr. President, I stand before you to highlight the people of Turkana in northern Kenya, communities living on oil-rich land, yet burdened by the decades of marginalization, broken promises, and uncertainty. In 2010, the discovery of over 500 million barrels of oil raised hopes for prosperity. Communities believed development had arrived. Roads were built. People migrated seeking opportunities, and expectations soared. Yet more than a decade later, prosperity remains largely unfulfilled. The initial operator halted activities in 2020 after years of setbacks, leaving unfinished infrastructure and uncertainty. Today, a new company plans to invest billions and begin commercial production. While this renewed hope, it also revived concerns about transparency, environment protection, and fair benefit sharing. For Turkana people, this is not simply about oil. It's about dignity, justice, and inclusion. Most families rely on livestock herding, yet recurring droughts have devastated earth and intensified competition for scarce water and grazing lands. Large-scale oil development without safeguards risk deepening this vulnerability. They demand participation in decisions affecting their land, transparency agreements, ensuring fair revenue sharing and local opportunities, safeguards protecting water, land, and pastoral livelihoods. These demands are not practical. They are basic human rights. The international community must ensure developments in Turkana respect these rights and benefit the people who call this land home. Thank you for your attention, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Network of Women's Non-Governmental Organizations in the Islamic Republic of Iran for video intervention.
President, we take the floor to express profound concern over the grave humanitarian consequences of the recent acts of aggression carried out by the United States and occupying regime against Iran. These attacks have inflicted severe harm on civilians and essential infrastructures. Reports indicate over 19,700 civilian sites were damaged, including 16,000 homes, leaving 1,300 dead and nearly 15,000 injured, among them hundreds of women and children. One of the most tragic incidents was the killing of 168 schoolgirls in Minab. 29 hospitals, 65 schools and water facilities on Qeshmaland were destroyed. Attacks on energy installations have also realized toxic materials posing long-term threats to public health and environment. Such actions violate international humanitarian law and constitute crimes against humanity. We therefore call upon this Council to urgently investigate these atrocities, support the creation of an independent fact-finding mechanism, and reaffirm the international community's duty to protect civilians, especially women and children, in times of conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of ECOFON for a video intervention.
Mr. President, I belong to the Punch area of Jammu and Kashmir, where people have suffered a lot due to terrorism sponsored from across the border that has claimed lives of more than 100 people during the years 2021 to 2023 alone. In April 2024, terrorists affiliated to Lashkar-e-Taiba killed an innocent Muslim civilian Muhammad Razak in Thanamandi area, close to where I live, to spread fear among the people. Similarly, in year 2023, these Pakistani terrorists broke into several houses in Rajouri, opened indiscriminate fire and carried out an IED blast, killing 7 innocent civilians while injuring 12 others, including elderly women and children. Amongst those who were killed were 4, 7, 14 and 16-year-old children. Mr. President, while the local population have desire for development, Pakistan-based terrorist groups, by targeting innocent human lives, have destroyed the local business and economy, causing hardship to many families in my region. Mr. President, the Holy Quran says, "Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin aw fasadin fil ardi faka'annama qatala an-nas jami'a." This verse means that human life is sacred. On behalf of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, I urge the international community to take notice of these acts of barbarism and hold the culprits responsible for the crimes against humanity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Article 19 International Center Against Censorship for a video intervention.
Article 19 urges the Human Rights Council to address the devastating violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law unfolding in Iran and across the wider region, including military strikes by the United States and Israel against Iran, Iran's subsequent response across the Gulf, and Israel's offensive in Lebanon. The humanitarian consequences of the war have been severe. At least 1,330 civilians have been killed in Iran, while at least 634 people have been killed and more than 816,000 displaced in Lebanon. As the conflict continues to threaten the whole region and carries far-reaching international implications, Article 19 condemns the ongoing violations of the right to freedom of expression and access to information, which prevents independent reporting and documentation of the war and further endangers lives. This includes criminalization and restrictions on war reporting, alongside war propaganda and other information manipulation. At the same time, Iranian authorities once again imposed a blanket internet shutdown following the attack by the United States and Israel, a tactic repeatedly used by the government, including most recently during the January 2026 protest when the regime killed over 36,500 people. The conflict has been marked by an increased integration of AI for intelligence analysis, operational planning, and target identification, including by the United States and Israel, with serious implications for transparency, accountability, and the safety of civilians. With the conflict continuing to escalate, Article 19 calls for an immediate ceasefire and protection of civilians, and for all parties to uphold the right to freedom of expression.
Okay, thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Human Rights Watch.
Mr. President, Human Rights Watch is extremely concerned about the potential for grave harms to civilians in the context of the escalating conflict in the Middle East, not only in light of previous documented laws of war violations by the United States, Israel and Iran and other parties to the conflict, and past failures to protect civilians in conflict, but also alarming rhetoric expressing disregard for international law. To date, Human Rights Watch has documented an unlawful attack on a primary school in Iran, which should be investigated as a war crime by the US. The illegal ongoing internet shutdowns and communications restrictions in Iran, which violate human rights and put civilians at greater risk amid the conflict, and warned over grave risks to civilians in Lebanon, and the unlawful use of white phosphorus over homes by the Israeli military in southern Lebanon. States should join the High Commissioner in independent mandates urging all parties to uphold international law and prioritise the protection of civilians. There can be no room for double standards on international law. States should prioritise human rights and atrocity prevention across the board, clearly and unequivocally condemning Iranian authorities' crimes against their own people and the potential impact of Tehran's strikes on civilians, while also clearly and unequivocally condemning violations of international humanitarian law by the US, Israel and others. We encourage the High Commissioner to convene an emergency briefing for this Council with the participation of relevant independent mandates on immediate measures to prevent further atrocities and monitor and ensure investigations of violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Kiam Rehabilitation Center for Victims of Torture.
President, as the chairman of GSN Freedom Movement, I draw the Council attention to the human rights situation in Sindh. Dozens of Sindhi political figures have been victims of extrajudicial killing like Bashir Khan Qureshi, Shafi Mohammad Karnani, Muzaffar Bhutto and dozens of others. Now then 100 political workers including Talib Lagari, Ayub Kandoro, Ejaz Gao are missing. In past 25 years, more than 3,500. Our brother nations like Baloch, Pashtun, Saraiki, Gilgiti and Kashmiri also facing same. Baloch leader Dr. Nasim Baloch, father also missed. Dr. Marang Baloch in prisons, while Pashtun leader Ali Wazir is illegally in prison and Manzoor Pashtun is absconder. Sindh is also facing injustice like whether the diversion project threatened the Indus River, demographic engineering through mass settlement and illegal land occupation. So Sindhi nation seek the peaceful and democratic exercise of their right to self-determination and request the United Nations to facilitate a supervised referendum in Sindh within the people who moved to Sindh before 1954, so that Sindhi people may freely decide their political future in accordance with international law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of International Bar Association for video intervention.
La International Platform Against Impunity, Acting Together, Hotai Program, Peace Brigades International e Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada manifestan su preocupación.
State their concern that the context in Guatemala hasn't changed despite the efforts of the executive power to promote a state of democracy. There's been a worsening structural problem with lack of judicial independence and lack of effective disciplinary oversight over judges appointed to promote criminal proceedings, coupled with criminal persecutions against journalists, human rights defenders, justice operators and social leaders. What's particularly troubling is criminalization of indigenous authorities accused of terrorism in reprisal for their role in protecting democracy during the post-electoral crisis in 2023, as well as arbitrary detention of 2 of their leaders and others who have been forced to leave the country to avoid reprisals. We call for an end to be put to the criminal instrumentalization against justice to operators, human rights defenders, journalists, indigenous authorities, and undue use of crimes of terrorism, illicit association and usurpation. As an opportunity for positive change, we call for transparency and for adherence to international standards during the election processes of magistrates to the Constitutional Court and of the new Prosecutor General, which will be taking place in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of World Peace Council.
Mr. President, Resolution 5736, entitled Situation of Human Rights in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, is the result of a mandate imposed by the United States and the European Union. The countries supporting the resolution are the same ones that impose or support over 1,000 illegal unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela to cripple the country's economy and starve its people. The criminal January 3 U.S. military attack on Venezuela, killing 100 people and kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores, is a step further in the ongoing attempt at regime change. The attacks on Venezuela's national sovereignty and self-determination, as well as Venezuela's participatory democracy, which has lifted millions out of poverty, constitute the main obstacle to the full enjoyment of human rights by the Venezuelans. We call on the High Commissioner to refuse to cooperate with the politicization of human rights by the US and European governments and the double standard applied by the Council in denouncing human rights violations. We call on the High Commissioner to denounce the criminal US military attack on Venezuela and kidnapping of its president in violation of international law and the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, and to defend the right to peace and sovereignty of all peoples. For this body to possess credibility in standing for human rights, it must address these issues first before it can legitimately address any other concerns regarding Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Maloca International.
Thank you, President. For a number of years, the territory of Western Sahara, occupied illegally by Morocco, has been virtually closed to international independent monitoring. Restrictions imposed on observers, journalists, and human rights organizations lead to a lack of transparency, which makes it difficult to take an objective analysis of the situation on the ground. We express special concern at acts of reprisals against human rights defenders, Sahrawi defenders, committed by Morocco. We've documented case of political prisoners, arbitrary detentions, and restriction on freedom of expression and association. Protection of those who protect human rights constitutes a fundamental obligation as per international law. Therefore, the situation of political prisoners continues to be alarming, especially the group known as the Name Is It group, are serving long sentences, including extracting confessions under torture, prolonged isolation and inadequate access to healthcare. We regret, sir, also the lack of implementation of resolutions issued by the UN, including the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and the Committee Against Torture. Non-compliance with those decisions weakens the effectiveness of the international human rights protection system. Sir, we reiterate the urgent need to bolster international monitoring of Western Sahara occupied by Morocco, effective protection for human rights defenders, and full compliance with the recommendations of the United Nations mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Human Rights International.
We join the Special Rapporteur in urging the international community to continue to stand with the people of Myanmar. Since the military coup, the junta has killed at least 7,738 civilians and arbitrarily arrested more than 30,000. The junta continues to escalate atrocities against civilians. Aerial bombings on civilian infrastructure and services have increased fivefold in the past year. In 2025 alone, more than 100,000 young men were reportedly drafted to fight against their own communities. The humanitarian situation on the ground is catastrophic. The junta has cut off transportation links and communication lines, leading to a surge in commodity prices and shortages of food and medicine. Despite these challenges, the people of Myanmar remain hopeful of a democratic future. The civil disobedience movement has evolved into a broad-based campaign to build a federal democracy from the ground up. We urge the international community to keep up the pressure on the military junta through sanctions on arms, aviation fuel and financial institutions, categorically reject the results of the sham elections, stripping the junta of any form of legitimacy, continue international efforts aimed at holding the junta accountable for its crimes, step up humanitarian funding to local civil society organisations, and recognise and support the democratic aspirations of the people of Myanmar through engagement with the National Unity Government, ethnic resistance organisations and civil society organisations. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor To the Center Europe, Tiers Mon.
Monsieur le Président.
President, I'm speaking today as a child from the Palestinian diaspora, a people who is combating a genocidal regime supported by the complicity of too many states. In France, we're seeing targeted criminalizing of us, which is part of the historic colonial continuum. Our organization, Urgence Palestine, is seeing its demonstrations banned, our events censored, our sources frozen. The violations of our rights are being stepped up with laws which are meant to combat terrorism, which allow muzzling of any criticism of Israel. And we're seeing this in far too many countries. Our popular movement is being suppressed. Personally, I am being investigated for apologising for terrorism, and my assets have been frozen whilst I am just calling for the rights of my people to resist, a right which is enshrined in international law. These are flagrant violations of the rights to freedom of expression, of association and peaceful assembly. To conclude, we call upon the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms to follow closely the situation in France and to recall the obligations to the state as regards protection of human rights. This involves abandoning the procedure to dissolve the Urgence Palestine organization, to cease targeting and suppressing in an unjustified manner its leaders who are fighting for the liberation of Palestine. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Partners for Transparency.
Thank you, Mr. President. Partners expressed a deep concern regarding human rights situation in Yemen and escalating serious violations committed by parties to that conflict, undermining the basic rights of civilians. Mr. President, the forces affiliated with the Southern Transitional Council have committed a wave of serious violations during the armed innovations that started last November in several cities of Yemen. Partners had documented over 832 serious violations, including 54 cases of arbitrary killing and extrajudicial execution. Furthermore, Partners has validated the detention of at least 332 civilians by the forces affiliated with STC during this operation without judicial order or legal guarantees. In conclusion, Mr. President, Partners urge that the forces affiliated with STC to cease all violations against civilians, release all arbitrarily detained individuals, and ensure respect for international humanitarian law and the human rights law. We also encourage the Council to give urgent attention to these violations and strengthen accountability mechanism. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Rencontre Africaine pour la Défense des Droits de l'Homme.
Monsieur le Président.
President, RADO would express its grave concerns as to the systematic suppression of public freedoms, kidnappings and forced disappearances. We are seeing that there's a banning of demonstrations, the arbitrary arrest for politically motivated reasons, and we are seeing that there are kidnappings and forced disappearances of political opponents. We are seeing that young people, children, women, activists, journalists, human rights defenders are disappearing. In this context of terror, we're seeing the impunity and the dissolving of political parties. And there's organisation of elections with no guarantees at all. This cannot then be a credible basis for constitutional order to be maintained in Guinea. In a regional context, we are concerned about the similar limitation of freedoms in Mali and in Burkina and in Niger. Niger, where the President Mohamed Bazoum is still detained after the military coup. We're seeing this dynamic trend, which is not strengthening stability in the region. We're not seeing good prospects for democracy and safe security in Sahel. RADO calls attention to the major violations of human rights in Guinea. And also in Niger, we call for the immediate unconditional release of President Bazoum. And in Mali and Burkina, we call for opening up a civic space. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Mat for Peace, Development and Human Rights Association.
Matt is deeply concerned by the military escalation, attacks, and counterattacks in the Middle East. Matt believes that intercontinental ballistic and border missiles, bombers, drones, and tomahawks will not bring freedom, democracy, or security to the people. You have living examples from history in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mr. President, the military escalation has led to considerable waves of displacement in the Middle East. More than 3 million people have been displaced in Iran and 700,000 in Lebanon, figures that are likely to increase in the coming weeks. Moreover, the US-Israeli attacks on Iran and Iranian attacks on Gulf states all disregard the principles of necessity, proportionality, and distinction between military and civilian targets. The humanitarian impact, instability of energy prices, and high costs that people will bear as a result of this war threatens to lead to a vicious cycle of crises and catastrophic consequences for the peoples of the Middle East. Matt therefore calls upon the member states of this council, as well as observer states, not to involve themselves in this conflict and to urge all warring parties to prioritize mediation and diplomatic solutions. Lastly, the relevant UN human rights mechanisms, including fact-finding missions, should independently examine and publish their conclusions on all violations of IHL committed by the various parties. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Iraqi Development Organizations for video intervention.
We draw the Council's attention to the serious human rights implications for both workers and local communities arising from Saudi Arabia's major construction projects. Flagship initiatives under Vision 2030, including NEOM and The Line, as well as preparations for 2034 FIFA World Cup, are presented as symbols of innovation and sustainability. However, these mega projects depend on a workforce of more than 16 million people, the great majority of whom are migrant workers. Many face precarious legal status, limited labour protections, excessive working hours, exposure to extreme summer heat, delayed or withheld wages, and restricted access to effective remedies. Moreover, reports indicate that in order to facilitate construction, members of the Huatait tribe were forcibly evicted and some individuals were arrested after peacefully opposing displacement from their ancestral lands. These practices raise serious concerns regarding the rights to adequate housing, just and favourable conditions of work, and freedom of expression. We call on the Council to urge Saudi Arabia to halt forced evictions, protect migrant workers' rights, and ensure independent oversight and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of International Foundation Witnesses Ashura, video intervention.
The Israeli and United States military aggression against Iran. The attack not only resulted in the assassination of the country's leader, but also led to the killing of more than 1,400 civilians, including women and children. This act is a violation of Iran's territorial integrity and constitutes a clear breach of the fundamental principle of international law and a serious threat to regional peace and security. One of the fundamental principles of the UN Charter is a good neighborliness, which emphasizes mutual respect, cooperation, and refrain from the threat or use of force. However, some countries in the Persian Gulf, by providing the military bases to the United States, having practice contributed to weakening this principle and expanding insecurity in the region. Such action, often justified under the claim of preemptive self-defense, have in reality led to the escalation of violence and instability. Mr. President, is it not time to reconsider the effectiveness of the numerous instruments and conventions intended to protect nations from such actions? Have they truly safeguarded the rights of people and ensured tangible accountability for those responsible? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Amnesty International.
Escalation of conflicts in the Middle East is the latest example of states and armed groups cramming suffering on top of suffering for civilians. People in Iran who just weeks ago endured massacres by the Islamic Republic for demanding their rights are now under massive bombardment by Israel and the United States amid Iran's deliberate internet shutdown. In these 2 weeks since the fighting escalated between Israel and Hezbollah, hundreds of thousands in Lebanon have been displaced, many for the second time, and more than 800, including more than 100 children, have been killed. Meanwhile, Hezbollah and Iran continue to launch attacks at Israel, and Iran and aligned groups launch attacks on Gulf countries and in Iraq, targeting U.S. military bases and oil infrastructure. In Gaza, Israel's genocide against Palestinians continues to inflict unspeakable suffering, while in the West Bank, Israeli security and state-backed settlers unleash deadly attacks on Palestinians, resulting also in the forcible transfer of communities. Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails endure horrific abuse. These are just some of the cruel policies of Israel's apartheid and unlawful occupation. From Russia's war in Ukraine to the Gulf, to Sudan, Myanmar, and beyond, war is being waged on and through civilians' bodies, places of refuge, water, and food. Mr. President, this is what the UN Atrocity Prevention Framework has been established to avoid. As a movement of people, we urge everyone to demand that governments prioritize the protection of civilians and respect for human rights over politics, starting with addressing structural causes for systemic crimes under international law and ending impunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Franciscan International for a joint statement.
We wish to reiterate our concerns over the dire human rights and humanitarian situation of internally displaced persons in northern Mozambique. Since our last statement in September 2025, non-state armed groups have continued to carry out attacks in Cabo Delgado and spilled over to Nampula province. Consequently, 500,000 persons were displaced in both provinces and face serious protection risks, including child abuse, mental health, and psychosocial needs due to re-traumatization and forced displacement. The decision to resume the Mozambican LNG project could worsen attacks by non-state armed groups if local communities' grievances are not adequately addressed. The National Human Rights Commission of Mozambique did not find any evidence supporting allegations of human rights abuse, despite the civil society reports. We, alongside civil society and local communities, stress the need, once again, for an independent investigation. As Mozambique engages with the UPR this year, we call on all member states to provide constructive recommendations, such as adopting measures to address the root causes of the conflict. We also stress the importance of ensuring accountability to address grave human rights violations committed by state armed forces, private military contractors, and NSAGs in Cabo Delgado, including transnational corporations. We welcome the opening of the new Oshure office in Mozambique and call for regular monitoring and reporting of the human rights situation and reflect it constantly during the High Commission's own updates. We thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the RSKS for video intervention.
Mr. President, as 1 year has passed since the Pahalgam terrorist attack, this moment invites not only remembrance but an evidence-based assessment how societies respond to terror. This terror attack was the darkest moment in Kashmir's history, carrying three significant meanings. First, it was an attack on Indian values of democracy, coexistence, and social harmony. Second, it was an assault on religious freedom and confirmation of the artificial theory that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together as a nation. Third, it was an attempt to derail tourism and religious tourism. A recent UN report on the deadly terror attack in Kashmir, where 26 tourists were killed near Pahalgam, highlights that nearly a year later, communal relations have not broken down on a large scale. This stability is largely the result of conscious decisions by both institutions and local communities. The experience after the Pahalgam attack reinforces principles recognized in international frameworks, including the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, which emphasizes that respect for human rights and social inclusion is integral to sustainable security. Mr. President, the nation stands with the victims, and we pay a respectful tribute to the innocent lives snuffed out brutally and prematurely, and express heartfelt condolences to the brave families. India remains devoted to combating tourism in all its forms while safeguarding the democratic and pluralistic values that strengthen social resilience. The lesson from the Pahalgam is not only national, it is universal. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Cheikh.
Mr. President, our organization appreciates the efforts of the United Nations Secretary General to reduce global tension and promote peaceful dialogue in regions affected by the conflicts. We express these concerns over the ongoing war involving the United States, Israel, and Iran. We call for the immediate cessation of hostility and urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint. The United Nations must play a vital role in promoting de-escalation and protecting civilian lives across the region. Mr. President, we draw the Council's attention to the deteriorating human rights situations in the forcibly divided erstwhile princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. The reports issued by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2018 and 2019 remains highly relevant and requires meaningful follow-up consistent with international law. For decades, the people of Jammu and Kashmir has lived under forced division. The line of control continues to separate families and restrict social and cultural interactions. The Jammu-Kashmir issue remains one of the longest unresolved matters on the United Nations agenda. In accordance with the relevant United Nations resolutions, it is fundamentally a human rights issue. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of IRADA, Organization Against Torture and Enforced Disappearance.
السيد الرئيس، أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، نخاطبكم من اليمن حيثما يزال آلاف
Ladies and gentlemen,
سرية بينما يواجه ملايين المدنيين اليوم.
I address you today from Yemen, where thousands of abductees remain confined in secret detention centers of the Houthi militias. The Houthi militia continues to commit grave violations against civilians. They have turned agricultural lands into minefields, recruited children and sent them to the furnaces of death, looted humanitarian aid and arrested humanitarian workers, including UN staff. Thousands of abductees remain forcibly disappeared. They are subject to torture, while some face death sentences outside the framework of the law. Entire city, Houthi sniper attacks targeting civilians continue, while more than 4 million civilians live under a suffocating siege for years. East Yemen witnessed serious violations last December when the head of the Transitional Council, Idrous al-Zubaydi, and his militias forcibly displaced hundreds of families from Wadi Hadramaut and carried out extrajudicial killings. Mr. President, the victims of Yemen do not only need statements of concern, they need a clear international stance that ends impunity. Therefore, we call upon the international community to take serious action to protect civilians, hold violations, and hold those responsible accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Green and Better World for a joint statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are deeply concerned about the continuing repression of civil society, journalists, and human rights defenders in Azerbaijan. Despite international attention on COP29 hosted in Baku in November 2024, the Azerbaijani authorities have continued to intensify their crackdown on independent voices. Journalists, civic activists, and human rights defenders are being arrested on politically motivated charges, including allegations of smuggling, tax violations, or extremism. Today, the number of political prisoners in the country has exceeded 400 individuals, including 9 courageous female journalists who remain in detention. The detainees face intimidation, harassment, physical abuse, and a lack of access to adequate medical care and basic hygiene products. As Azerbaijan prepares to host another international UN event from 17th to 22nd of May, repression has further intensified, including an alarming rise in international repression against critics abroad. We draw attention to the case of journalist and human rights defender Emin Huseynovun, who reportedly faced an assassination and kidnapping attempt in Geneva in February 2026 after publicly questioning Azerbaijan's vice president about the state of democracy in the country. This was followed by coordinated intimidation and defamation campaigns that continue to endanger his life. We call on the Human Rights Council to closely investigate the case of transnational repression tactics undertaken by Azerbaijan, particularly the case of Emin Huseynovun. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to International Service for Human Rights.
Mr. President, the human rights situation in occupied Western Sahara continues to require the Council's attention. Individuals peacefully advocating for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination continue to face harassment, intimidation, contributing to a restrictive civic space and limiting their ability to participate in public life and express their view fairly. Morocco continues to impose restriction on freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association. Human rights defenders and journalists reportedly face surveillance, intimidation, and reprisal for their legitimate activity, including engaging with the UN human rights mechanism, arbitrary detention, ill treatment, coerced confession, violation of due process and fair trial. Sahrawi people also reportedly face discrimination in access to housing, education, health service, and participation in cultural life. The exploitation of natural resources in occupied territory without the free and informed consent of the Sahrawi people continues. In light of the absence of regular independent human rights monitoring, we urge the Council to ensure unhindered access to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and Special Procedures to Western Sahara, as to enable independent assessment and reporting while ensuring that human rights defenders are protected from intimidation and reprisals. The Council also should urge Morocco to release those arbitrarily detained, safeguard fundamental freedoms, and uphold the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of International Commission of Jurists.
Thank you, Mr. President. The rule of law is eroding in all regions of the world, undermining both domestic and international governance. 2 decades ago, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan told the General Assembly that every nation that proclaims the rule of law at home must respect it abroad, and every nation that insists on it abroad must enforce it at home. Without a doubt, those words resonate even more loudly today. The international rule of law rests on a framework established by the UN Charter and the standards developed under its authority. Yet its foundations are under strain, as states increasingly disregard fundamental obligations, including the prohibition on the threat or use of force contained in Article 2.4. This includes two permanent members of the Security Council, Russia and the United States. As members of the UN, these states are not only obliged to comply with the Charter, but also as members of the Security Council, carry a heightened responsibility to uphold it. Today, we are witnessing a growing disregard for multilateralism, as highlighted in the statement by the Friends of Human Rights Multilateralism. Within multilateral institutions, including this Council, civic space is narrowing. The protection of human rights depends on the integrity of these institutions and the role of civil society. We call on this Council to fulfill its essential role in addressing these threats. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Civicus, World Alliance for Citizen Participation.
Mr. President, we remain deeply concerned about the deteriorating human rights situation in Tajikistan. The country's civic space rating was downgraded by the Civicus Monitor from a repressed to close following a crackdown on civil society, which worsened in the wake of the repression of protests in Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Oblast in 2022. State repression continues against CSOs, journalists, lawyers, and activists, exposing grave human rights violations. Freedom of expression is severely limited, with journalists jailed and frequent criminal prosecutions based on social media activity. Extremism-related charges continue to be abused to target HRDs and activists. Many of them have been arbitrarily detained and sentenced to long prison terms on politically motivated charges, including lawyers, Yorov and Khalid Nazarov. Journalists also serve long sentences for their coverage of the events. There are ongoing reports of prisoners being subjected to torture and ill treatment, including denial of adequate medical care, which has led to the death of 6 activists in prison in the last year alone. CSOs nationwide face closure or persecution. In the last 5 years, over 700 CSOs have been closed or forced to dissolve. Last year, another 85 CSOs ceased their operations, while 7 were liquidated by court order for alleged violations. We call on this Council to establish an independent investigative mechanism in Tajikistan and to investigate events in the GBAO. We also urge the authorities to unconditionally release all activists in prison for political reasons, including those referenced by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and Special Rapporteurs. We request the Council to keep the human rights situation in Tajikistan under close review under the complaint procedure. We thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Tumuku Development and Cultural Union.
Mr. President, in a letter addressed to Bangladesh former interim government chief, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the Committee to Protect Journalists said Bangladesh currently holds 5 journalists in prison on murder charges, but the accusation against them lack credible evidence and appear to be in retaliation for their reporting and perceived political affiliations. Those 5 journalists are Shahriar Kabir, Farjana Rupa, Shakil Ahmed, Mojammel Babu, Shamal Datto. The latter from ICJ said they were languishing in high-security prison for nearly 2 years, where medical care is severely inadequate. They are being kept in conditions that raise a serious human rights concern, the letter added. To address this crisis, it is recommended that Bangladesh immediately establish an independent judicial commission to investigate all killings and physical assaults on journalists and cultural activists, ensuring that perpetrators are prosecuted without exception. The government must unconditionally release all those 5 detained journalists for their professional work to protect the freedom of expression. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of ARC.
Mr. President, the ARC Association regrets that it has not been able to complete the documentation of crimes against humanity that may have been committed by the Islamic Republic of Iran during the January 2026 protests due to the internet shutdown and other disruptions imposed by the Iranian authorities. We express our deep concern regarding the fate of civil society members and activists arrested during and after these protests in Iranian Azerbaijan. Their detention raises serious concerns that they may be used as human shields. For many years, the ARC Association has informed this Council that Azerbaijanis in Iran face persistent forms of systemic discrimination. These include the continued denial of access to education in their mother tongue, the existence of child marriages, the exploitation of natural resources, and the deliberate drying of Lake Urmia, which has severely affected social cohesion and the livelihoods of local populations. We are also concerned about the situation of Azerbaijani prisoners held in Evin prison, including Abbas Lisani, Yusuf Kari, Murtaza Parvin, and many other detainees. Received information indicates they are being held in extremely concerning conditions without adequate access to hygiene, water, or food. We recall that Iran is obliged to respect the Nelson Mandela rules on the treatment of prisoners. We urge the Council to take the necessary measures to mitigate these risks and to ensure the protection of civilians as well as Azerbaijani detainees. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Asociacionhatseoir.org.
President, distinguished delegates, we must speak today about a tragedy that the world can no longer ignore, the mass killing of Christian communities in Nigeria. For years, extremist groups such as Boko Haram, the Islamic State, have carried out brutal attacks against civilians. Villages have been burned to the ground, churches have been destroyed, priests have been kidnapped, families have been massacred in their homes. Thousands of Christians are killed every year in Nigeria simply because of their faith. In fact, Nigeria accounts for the majority of Christians killed for their faith worldwide. These are not isolated incidents. This is a persistent pattern of violence that demands urgent international attention. Civil society organizations, including the group CitizenGo, have mobilized thousands of citizens around the world, calling on governments to act and to stop the mass slaughter of innocent people. Freedom of religion or belief is a fundamental human right protected by Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yet today, in parts of Nigeria, people risk their lives simply by attending church. The international community cannot remain indifferent while entire communities are attacked and destroyed in a mass killing and extermination exercise. We therefore call on governments and international institutions to take this crisis seriously, to strengthen international monitoring, and to support effective measures that protect vulnerable communities from further violence, the protection of human life, and the defense of religious...
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada for a joint statement by video.
Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada and the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, endorsed by the Centre for Supporters of Human Rights, are alarmed by the situation in Iran. Airstrikes damaging prison structures are placing detainees at grave risk. Iranian law, including Supreme Judicial Council Resolution number 211, allows emergency furloughs, temporary release, or transfer of prisoners to safety during conflict and should be urgently implemented. At least 20 lawyers remain detained for conducting their professional duties. 7 lawyers were released on heavy bail but remain at risk of rearrest. They and at least 29 other lawyers face criminal proceedings. The number is likely higher due to fear of reprisals and difficulties monitoring during conflict. We urge Iran to halt reprisals against lawyers, ensure all detainees prompt and confidential access to counsel of their choice, release lawyers detained for conducting their professional duties, and protect all prisoners during the armed conflict. We urge the Council to fully support the fact-finding mission and Special Rapporteur on Iran. We condemn all unlawful uses of force, including actions by the United States and Israel against Iran, and Iran's retaliation across the region. We urge an immediate cessation of hostilities consistent with obligations under the UN Charter and international human rights and humanitarian law. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the Institute for Human Rights.
I address you today to draw your attention to the growing problem of transnational repression carried out by the Azerbaijani government beyond its borders, including on the territory of Switzerland. These actions increasingly target journalists and human rights defenders who continued their work in exile. My name is Emin Huseynovun, and I'm an Azerbaijani human rights defender based in exile in Switzerland. Today, I'm not able to participate in person at the Human Rights Council because I do not feel safe in my hometown, Geneva, following my public exchange with the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and Vice President Mehriban in February 2026 during the Munich Security Conference, where I raised questions about repressions and democracy in Azerbaijan. A coordinated smear campaign was launched against me in pro-government media. Shortly afterwards, several alarming incidents occurred in Geneva, including surveillance by suspicious individuals and what appeared to be attempted assassinations and abductions near the United Nations office. These events raised serious concern about the safety of human rights defenders engaging with the international institutions in Geneva. I call on the Human Rights Council and on Switzerland in particular to closely investigate this case, ensure accountability of the perpetrators who were clearly captured by the CCTV cameras, and to take all necessary measures to ensure my safety and the protections of those who engage with UN human rights mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of India Water Foundation for video intervention.
Mr. President, India Water Foundation is in alignment with the report of Special Rapporteur underscoring the intrinsic link between cultural rights and nature conservation. For India, culture and nature are deeply intertwined, reflected in traditional knowledge systems, sacred landscape, and community stewardship of biodiversity. The Constitution of India protects the cultural and educational rights of communities, including minorities and indigenous people, while environmental protection is enshrined as a fundamental duty. The Forest Rights Act empowers forest-dwelling communities by recognizing their traditional rights over land and forest resources, enabling participatory conservation models. Being a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, India promotes biodiversity conservation alongside the protection of traditional knowledge, community-led conservation initiatives. Eco-development committees and biodiversity management committees integrate cultural heritage with environmental stewardship. Sacred groves, traditional water bodies, and pastoral systems are supported through policies that value indigenous ecological knowledge. Since our inception, we have ensured that conservation policies are inclusive, rights-based, and culturally sensitive, recognizing that safeguarding nature also means safeguarding the cultural identities and knowledge systems that have sustained it for generations. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Coordinating Board of Jewish Organizations for a video intervention.
Mr. President, recent weeks, months, and years have made obvious that human rights cannot be detached from the ideology of those who most grievously deny them. Among Israelis, Arabs, and Iranians, peace, pluralism, and prosperity would be possible if not for the determination of fanatic elements led by the regime in Tehran. That regime has been responsible for killing hundreds of thousands, both Muslims and members of diverse minorities. The regime has brutally oppressed, tortured, and disappeared millions of its own people and hijacked their badly needed resources. The regime has consistently been by far the leading state sponsor of global terrorism, arming violent extremists from the Palestinian territories to Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, and deliberately targeting innocents in Argentina, Bulgaria, India, Australia, and far beyond, including Ukraine. The regime has explicitly and obsessively pledged death to America and death to Israel, relentlessly murdering, terrorizing, and taking hostage the citizens of those democracies either directly or through its proxies. At the same time, the regime has aggressively pursued a massive offensive missiles program and an illicit nuclear capability that could carry out its exterminationist genocidal threats. Can it be said that the US and Israel launched a war with Iran? Tehran has been waging that war for 47 years. Today's adversaries once enjoyed friendship. We join the vast majority of the world's people in yearning for that friendship to be reality soon again. Thank you.
I call upon all speakers to uphold UN standards when referring to countries. And I'll give the floor to the representative of Patiala Foundation for a video intervention.
We welcome this opportunity to address the situation of religious and linguistic minorities, including the often overlooked condition of their religious heritage and related cultural rights. In South Asia, Hindu temples and Sikh gurdwaras linked to communities displaced during partition are not simply historic structures, they are living repositories of minority memory and identity. When such sites are neglected, encroached upon, or repurposed without meaningful participation, communities experience a slow erosion of belonging, even without overt violence. India treats the protection of minority heritage as a proactive duty. Through the National Mission on Monuments and Antiquities, more than 1.24 million antiquities and thousands of heritage sites have been documented, helping ensure that no cultural thread is lost. Patiala Foundation's Project iHeritage complements these efforts by using digital tools and QR-coded digital heritage walks to connect the global diaspora with their ancestral roots. Recent public reporting on a document presented to Pakistan's Parliamentary Committee on the Minority Caucus, including by Dawn and several fire services, indicates that out of 1,817 Hindu temples and Sikh gurdwaras documented in Pakistan, only 37 are currently functional. These reports raise serious concerns that inadequate protection of minority religious heritage can contribute to cultural attrition and deepen feelings of exclusion for affected communities. Mr. President, minority rights are incomplete without the rights to memory, identity, and worship. We therefore encourage this Council and Member States to recognize religious heritage as a core dimension of human rights and to work in genuine partnership with affected communities to document, protect, and where possible, digitize their heritage so that the legacy of all minorities can be preserved for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Sindhi Adhikar Manch Association for video intervention.
Mr. President, we take the floor to highlight the commitment to advancing the rights and protection of women in India. Gender equality is a constitutional guarantee under the Article 14 and 15 of the Indian Constitution, ensuring equality before law and prohibiting discrimination on the grounds of sex. India has enacted comprehensive legislations to safeguard women's rights, including laws addressing domestic violence, workplace harassment, child marriage, and trafficking. The Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act and the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act provide important legal remedies and institutional safeguards. The Supreme Court of India has further strengthened women's rights through progressive judgments affirming dignity, privacy, reproductive autonomy, and equal opportunity. Institutionally, the National Commission for Women plays a key role in monitoring violations, supporting victims, and recommending policy reforms. India continues to implement targeted programs promoting girls' education, maternal health, financial inclusion, and political participation at local governance levels. Mr. President, while challenges remain, sustained legal reforms, judicial oversight, and social initiatives reflect India's ongoing commitment to ensure that women live with equality, safety, and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the European Center for Law and Justice for a video intervention.
Mr. President, recently the world has witnessed a sharp and heartbreaking escalation of Christian persecution in Iran. As nationwide protests erupted at the end of December, the regime has responded with lethal force, killing thousands of civilians and tightening its grip on religious minorities. The recent situation puts an even bigger target on Christians, as the government already views them as a threat to national security. This wave of persecution is not new, but it has reached unprecedented levels and is further proof of Iran's determination to eradicate the Christian presence in the country. The government's crackdown is only the most recent event that has led to Christian persecution. Unfortunately, since the Islamic Revolution, Iran has a history of targeting Christians and arresting them for gathering to worship, sharing their faith with others, or simply possessing Bibles and other Christian literature. Iran's continued practice of targeting, arresting, and killing Christians for their faith is a shameful and direct violation of the most foundational human rights. Iran should immediately release all Christians and other religious minorities detained on charges related to their faith, reopen forcibly closed churches, and stop the killing and targeting of Christians. We ask that this Council hold Iran accountable for its failure to abide by its obligation under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to ensure that all its citizens have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion.
I now give the floor to the representative of Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain.
السيد الرئيس الاضطهاد الديني للشيعة في
Mr. President, religious persecution against Shias in Bahrain is ongoing. However, it intensifies during key religious occasions, such as Ashura or Sha'ban, demonstrating that every effort to exercise the right to worship is routinely met with deliberate repression. Recently, authorities have escalated restrictions on Shia religious practices. These measures have included the removal of religious models and symbols, as well as the summoning and arrest of individuals participating in religious commemorations. In the village of Al-Ma'amir, a repeated systematic pattern of religious repression has taken place over the past 2 months. Police forces removed several religious displays, including a model of the Kaaba and symbols marking the birth anniversaries for prominent Shia religious figures. Following these crackdowns, participants were summoned and arrested. Since 2011, Bahrain has consistently suppressed Shia rights, closing mosques, disrupting Friday prayers, and imposing restrictions on religious commemorations for Shia political prisoners. We condemn the restrictions on Shia religious practices and call on Bahrain to end sectarian discrimination and uphold its commitments to respect and protect religious freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the Global Institute for Water, Environment and Health.
Reaffirmed by this Council, health equity is central to sustainable development and to the effective enjoyment of all human rights. India's e-Sanjivani telemedicine platform demonstrated how digital innovation can advance the right to development in health. By facilitating over 200 million consultations, it connects patients in remote and underserved areas with qualified medical professionals, overcoming geographic, financial, and systemic barriers. It strengthens primary health care, support maternal health, and enhance the resilience of health systems. Through South-South and triangular cooperation, India shares this model with partner countries, promoting inclusive, participatory, and equitable development. This initiative aligns with SDG 3 on health, SDG 9 on innovation, and SDG 10 on reducing inequalities, while prioritizing accessibility, affordability, and non-discrimination in line with human rights guidance. India's experience showed that technology, when guided by human rights principles and integrated into national systems, can empower community, strengthen health equity, and operationalize the right to development by leveraging digital health as a public good. India provides a concrete example of how innovation can improve outcomes, reduce inequalities, and support sustainable.
I now give the floor to the Institut International pour les droits et le développement.
President, we are deeply concerned by the accelerating rise of Islamophobia in France. Amid an hostile public climate, Muslim communities are increasingly reduced as security threat through essentializing narratives that fuel discrimination and legitimize repression. This trend is reinforced by the normalization of anti-Muslim rhetoric in part of French media and political discourse, where debates on radical Islamism routinely stigmatize Muslim communities as a whole. As a result, expression of solidarity by politicians, human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society
face intimidation, surveillance, and administrative repression. But this is not only a domestic issue. Evidence indicates that foreign actors, including the United Arab Emirates, have supported campaigns targeting Muslim communities and activists in France and across Europe, including through private companies such as Arab Services. These practices endanger freedom of expression, association, and the safety of human rights defenders. We call the Council to use France and the United Arab Emirates to respect their human rights obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Promotion du Développement économique et social.
سيد الرئيس، تعرب منظمتنا عن قلق. Our organization expresses deep concern regarding the human rights and the humanitarian situation in the Sahrawi refugee camps near Tindouf, where tens of thousands of people live in fragile humanitarian and legal conditions marked by limited legal protection, absence of independent oversight, and socio-economic challenges that directly affect the daily lives of the population. The situation on the ground reveals three major concerns. First, the lack of comprehensive international legal protection. Many residents do not possess internationally recognized standard protection documents, which increase their vulnerability and limits their ability to fully enjoy fundamental rights. Second, the limited mechanisms for monitoring and accountability, the absence of independent and regular mechanisms to monitor the human rights situation within the camps. Third, the persistence of gaps in the legal and regulatory framework related to population registration and legal documentations. These conditions are not a temporary humanitarian challenge only. They represent a real test of the international community's commitment to protecting human rights. In light of the situation, we call for strengthening human rights in the camps and to cooperate with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and relevant United Nations agencies to support population registration processes. Third, there should be an encouragement of international community and of all concerned stakeholders and supporters, and the President interrupts.
To the representative of Midline for Human Rights for a video intervention.
Grave concern regarding the catastrophic human rights situation in Sudan and the role of external support in enabling ongoing atrocities, particularly by the Rapid Support Forces. Since April 2023, civilians across Sudan, especially in Darfur and Khartoum, have faced widespread and systematic violations. These include extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention, conflict-related sexual violence, forced displacement, and attacks on humanitarian personnel. United Nations reporting has repeatedly identified the Rapid Support Forces as responsible for many of these crimes, some of which may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Despite this record, the RSF continue to operate with alarming capacity. Credible UN findings and independent investigations raise serious concerns about external military, financial, and logistical support sustaining these operations, including allegations concerning the United Arab Emirates that require urgent and transparent scrutiny. International law is clear. States must not provide assistance where there is a clear risk of contributing to serious violations of human rights or humanitarian law. We urge the Council to investigate external support to the RSF, ensure compliance with arms embargoes, and strengthen accountability mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of International Muslim Women's Union for video intervention.
Council today with regards to civic space.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. إن حرية تكوين الجمعيات والتعبير والمشاركة السياسية ليس مزية تعطيها الحكومات، ولكنه حق محمي بالقانون الدولي. وخلال السنوات الأخيرة وبعد التغييرات الدستورية في أغسطس 2019 فإن المشهد المدني في جمهورية كشمير تعرض لتحول دراماتيكي، وكذلك شاهدنا تأثيرا على الصحة والأنشطة الاقتصادية والرعاية الصحية، بالإضافة إلى أعمال احتجاز ضد المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان والنشطاء والشباب، بالإضافة إلى زيادة الرقابة ضد الصحفيين ومنظمات المجتمع المدني وقيود فرضت على حرية التعبير والاحتجاج. وعندما يصبح النفاذ للإنترنت غير يقيني تتضعضع حرية التعبير، وعندما يتقيد التجمع تسقط أصوات الديمقراطية. المجال الرقمي الذي كان حيزا لتمكين الشباب الكشميريين تحول إلى حيز مراقب ومقيد، أدى ذلك إلى عمليات إغلاق للإنترنت مطولة واضطرابات تقنية على المستوى اليومي. صغار التجار الذين يعتمدون على سبل عيشهم تعتمد على التجارة الرقمية، والأسر المنفصلة عن ذويهم وأحبائهم يتعرضون خلال فترات التعتيم هم من تعرضوا لهذه المآسي. شكرا. International Action for Peace and Sustainable Development. سيد الرئيس، منظمتي تلفت انتباه المجلس إلى احتجاز السجناء السياسيين المطول في جمو وكشمير المحتلة من الهند. شابير شاه قضى 39 عاما تقريبا في الاحتجاز دون إدانة. المحكمة الدستورية منحته إفراجا مؤقتا ولكنه لا يزال مسجونا، والوضع يثير شؤونا كبيرة فيما يتعلق بتنفيذ الأوامر القضائية ونفاذ العدالة. هذا النمط يمتد إلى صحفيين ومدافعين في المنطقة. خورم بارفيز وعرفان مهراج لا يزالون في احتجاز سابق للمحاكمة بموجب القوانين المختلفة ويواجهون نفاذا مقيدا للمحامين. والصحفيون والنشطاء عادة والطلاب عادة ما يستهدفون بشكل منهجي بموجب القوانين التقييدية. والاعتقالات الأخيرة بعد الاحتجاجات السلمية ضد الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية الأمريكية على إيران شدد من القمع ضد الكشميريين الشباب. هذه الأحداث لها آثار دينية وثقافية عميقة لدى المسلمين في المنطقة، ومعاقبة الحرية التعبير السلمية وقود الحريات الأساسية والعدالة. هذه هي الأنماط المزعجة تستلزم عملا عاجلا لضمان العناية الواجبة والإجراءات القانونية اللازمة وحماية جميع المحتجزين في جمو وكشمير. شكرا.
I give the floor to the representative of Association of Iranian Jurists Defending Human Rights for a video intervention.
Of God, Mr. President, despite the repeated emphasis of international human rights and humanitarian law on the protection of civilians, the immunity of civilian objects, and the preservation of international peace and security, recent years have witnessed a troubling pattern of escalating tensions and coercive actions against Iran developments, whose direct consequences have been borne by civilians and the fundamental rights of human beings. In recent months, escalating military tensions involving the United States, culminating in the attack carried out by the United States and Israel on 28 February across 30 provinces of the country, have caused significant damage. In these incidents, more than 1,000 civilians lost their lives and 1,000 more were injured, ranging from a 2-month-old infant to the elderly. Nearly 20,000 civilian buildings were destroyed and numerous environmental incidents occurred. This tragic reality once again demonstrates that ordinary people are the primary victims of the war and escalating hostilities from Gaza to Iran. Mr. President, the international community is expected to uphold the principles of the United Nations Charter by taking practical steps to prevent further escalation. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of United Villages. I give the floor to the representative of Réveil Communautaire d'Assistance aux Victimes.
Mr. President, I stand before you today with an urgent warning. What is happening in Pakistan represents a troubled erosion in the institution meant to protect human rights. On November 13, 2025, Pakistan passed its 27th constitutional amendment. This amendment stripped the Supreme Court of its power to protect fundamental rights and transferred that authority to a court whose judges are chosen by politicians, raising serious concerns about judicial independence and the rule of law. Equally concerning is the provision granting lifetime immunity from prosecution to the President and similar protections to senior military officers. Article 27 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights clearly states that all persons are equal before the law. Creating individuals above the law contradicts this principle. Human rights organizations have condemned the use of the judiciary to suppress dissidents. The arrest and sentence of human rights advocates Iman Zainab, Mazari Haizir, and Hadi Ali Chata illustrates this concern. I urge this Council to adopt a resolution, establish a fact-finding mission, and call on Pakistan to ensure its laws remains consistent in the International Covenant and on Civil and Political Rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the Institute for Protection of Women's Rights for a video intervention.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, since February 28, 2026, the aggressive military attacks by the American-Israeli coalition have been concentrated against a wide range of civilian targets in Iran. Among the objectives that these two aggressive states have attacked in a coordinated, systematic, and targeted manner are critical facilities and infrastructure, including oil depots, desalination plants, and electricity facilities in various Iranian cities. While attacking such critical infrastructure during armed conflict is completely prohibited, oil depots in several locations in Tehran and Karaj have been directly targeted. The Qeshm desalination plant in southern Iran has been destroyed. Numerous attacks have been carried out against electricity facilities in major metropolitan areas, and the President of the United States explicitly and without concern for its legal consequences threatens the Iranian nation with the complete destruction of all electricity facilities and the creation of nationwide blackouts. Mr. President, the Institute for Protection of Women's Rights condemns these unlawful attacks and the threats, therefore, which constitute a clear violation of international humanitarian law and human rights. We call for a decisive stance from the members of the Human Rights Council in condemning these actions, which severely threaten the lives, health, and living standards of civilians, particularly women and children. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Agence Internationale pour le Développement.
Monsieur le Président. President, the AID wishes to recall that migrants and persons on the move remain some of the most vulnerable parts of our population, given the risk of human rights violations. In this context, certain national initiatives illustrate that efforts undertaken to improve assistance to migrants can be successful. In Northern Africa, the experience of the Kingdom of Morocco deserves particular attention. Since they launched a national strategy for immigration and asylum, Morocco has developed a global humanist approach to migration based on the respect of fundamental rights and the progressive integration of migrants within society. Campaigns to regularize their situation have been carried out, allowing many thousands of migrants to obtain administrative status, opening up access to healthcare, education, and so on. And also we have seen structures established for them and social support, and several cities in the kingdom, such as Rabat, Saleh, Oujda, and Casablanca, and different provinces have been involved. And local initiatives involving public authorities and international organizations and civil society can help the social support and integration of migrants, as we've seen from this initiative. President, these initiatives show clearly that migratory governance based on solidarity, cooperation, and respect for human dignity are key to address the contemporary migratory challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Réseau Unité pour le Développement de Mauritanie.
Mr. President, the credibility of the Human Rights Council depends on the meaningful participation of civil society. Yet, across the world, we see shrinking civic space and increasing obstacles that prevent organizations from fulfilling their duty to defend human rights and give voice to victims. Civil society is not a political accessory. It is a cornerstone of accountability. When access to UN mechanisms become politicized, the very people who most need protection, like refugees, marginalized groups, and human rights defenders, are left vulnerable. To restore confidence, we must act decisively. Therefore, we urge the Council to safeguard impartial and transparent access for civil society organizations, ensuring that accreditation and speaking opportunities are never subject to political bargaining. Reinforce the independence of non-treaty bodies through regular mandate reviews and measurable follow-up to their recommendations. Mr. President, protecting the integrity of the UN system requires that the civil society voices be heard clearly and without obstruction. Only then we secure that the Human Rights Council remain the true guardian of human dignity and peace. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Sambali Trust.
Thank you, Mr. President. Terror attacks do not only take lives in a single moment. They destroy families, livelihoods, and the very fabric of peaceful coexistence. The terror attack in Pahalgam on 22nd April 2025 shattered many innocent lives, leaving families grieving, children traumatized, and communities living in fear and uncertainty. Such acts strike at the core of human rights, the right to live, security, dignity, and can never be justified under any circumstance. Sambali Trust condemns this attack and stands in solidarity with the victims and their families. Our work is guided by the belief that peace is built through compassion, inclusion, and dignity. In this spirit, Sambali supports asylum-seeking women and children in Jaisalmer for education, psychosocial care, livelihoods, and community-based programs. The UN has called for solidarity with victims, accountability for perpetrators, and collective action against terror networks. To do better, all nations must stand united, reject violence without exception, support victims and displaced communities, counter radicalization, and invest in peace building so that humanity, justice, and hope prevail over fear. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Juventum EV for a video intervention.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Juventum is honored to participate. More people are suffering from conflicts on top of long-standing human rights violations. Some communities are trapped and forgotten, while the Council discusses and condemns but sees too little action across the wider UN system. Human rights do not diminish during war. The rights to physical integrity and to a clean and safe environment, among others, remain essential. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster shows why long-term follow-up analysis are indispensable. 15 years later, the emergency continues, and the epidemiological impacts may peak later. Similar monitoring is also needed to prevent crises in the conflict areas from fading into just another sad story. Chemical and radioactive contamination worsen while public awareness declines. The omission of environment from the 17 SDG title words has weakened accountability. Nuclear power, revived under the pretext of geopolitical tensions, exposes workers and residents to risks. Education is essential. Human rights, scientific literacy, and UDHR must be taught universally. We urge the Council to call for concrete action across the UN system and to protect the civil society space. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Il Senacholo for video intervention.
Mr. Vice President, I would like to draw your attention to the situation of a minor child. His name is Mawlud al-Mahjoub, of 13 years of age. A situation that reflects the fragility of the situation of children in Tandouf camps in southwest Algeria. Thousands of people are still living in these areas in conditions that are not subject to legal framework. On the 25th of February 2026, this child was illegally abducted and detained in the camps. He, for hours, has been subject to beatings. The medical examination later proved that the claims that this action did not happen were false. However, no measures have been taken to hold the perpetrators accountable or to redress the victim, which once again reflects the impunity in the Tanduf camps. Mr. President, the Tanduf camps is indeed a space that lacks the application of the law. This clearly puts the responsibility on the shoulder of Algeria, being the country that has these camps on its territory. It is legally bound to protect those who reside within its regional territories. Thank you.
I give the floor now to the representative of Association Culturelle de Tamoul en France. And I now give the floor to the representative of World Muslim Congress.
Thank you, Mr. President. World Muslim Congress demands an international commission of inquiry into crimes against humanity in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. For 78 years, binding resolutions recognized it as a disputed territory have been ignored. The final disposition of Kashmir has been stolen by force. The systematic machinery of terror is metronymic. Enforced disappearances, creating thousands of off-widows, mass graves holding tortured, identified bodies, pellet guns deliberately aimed at children's faces, blinding hundreds. These are not aberrations, but calculated instrument of state policy. The occupation is also economic. Kashmir's rivers, mineral, forests, and land is looted, fueling the occupier's economy while imposing engineered poverty and colonial template of extraction. Kashmir is not an internal matter, as India states. It's an international dispute under the UN Charter, Geneva Conventions, and Human Rights Covenants. Sovereignty confers no license for genocide. To powerful states trading silence for commerce, your inaction forges chances of complicity. The impunity granted today becomes tomorrow's atrocity template. The people of Indian-occupied Kashmir have resisted for decades, refusing to surrender their identity and dignity. They demand only the right to self-determination and decide their own destiny according to UN Security Council resolutions. History watches, the mass graves, and the blind children demand witness. Act now or stand condemned by your own action. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Community Human Rights and Advocacy Center.
Mr. President, my organization draws the Council urgent attention to the deteriorating human rights situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where political freedoms, due process, property rights, and right to self-determination remain under increasing pressure. Hundreds of political detainees, including Hurriyat leaders, journalists, scholars, lawyers, and students, remain imprisoned. Prominent figures such as Masarat Alam Bhatt, Yasin Malik, Shabir Ahmad Shah, Asiya Andrabi, Famida Sufi, Naeem Ahmad Khan, Dr. Abdul Hamid Fiaz, Zafar Akbar Bhatt, human rights defender Khurram Parvez, and journalist Irfan Miraj continue to face prolonged incarceration under stringent laws. Access to justice remains severely delayed, with 351 sessions cases pending for more than 5 years, raising concerns about prolonged trials and the denial of due process. Repression is also extending into the digital sphere. In Badgam district, Sohail Ahmed Bhatt was booked by police on allegations of circulating provocative videos on social media, reflecting how vague accusations are used to criminalize online expression. In recent months, hundreds of properties have reportedly been seized or attached. Authorities frequently label exiled Kashmiris as operating from outside to justify confiscating homes and land. Practice critics warn risk dispossessing Kashmiris and contributing to demographic changes. Mr. President, we urge the Council to closely monitor these developments and address the continued erosion of fundamental rights in the region. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Ocapros International. I give the floor to the representative of Society for Development and Community Empowerment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Ramesh Kovind-Swamy, Tamil Nadu from India. Mr. President, this statement is submitted on behalf of Mr. P.S. Amarrao, Chairman of the Bar Council of Tamil Nadu and Pucheri, and all legal law from Tamil Nadu, India. The High Court of Tamil Nadu and Pucheri serve more than 154,000 registered advocates actively practicing under the respective bar councils. Reports indicate a concerning pattern of violence against advocates, including targeted attacks in recent years, which threaten their rights to life, personal security, and access to justice. We respectfully urge the United Nations Human Rights Council to call upon the Government of India and Tamil Nadu to consider the following protective measures: enactment of updated legislation specifically for the protection of advocates, provision of armed police escorts for advocates handling sensitive cases until resolution, deployment of a high-level security force at all court premises, strengthened safeguard for women advocates, insurance coverage and a minimum stipend for newly enrolled advocates for the first 5 years, and a restriction on bail and legal aid for individuals accused of murdering advocates. Mr. President, we implore the United Human Rights Council to remind India of its international human rights obligation, thereby safeguard the safety, independence and rights of advocates in Tamil Nadu and Pucheri. Mr. President, the suspension of former Conjurum Judge, Mr. P.U. Chemmal, aimed allegation of political pressure underscored the need for a federal intervention to uphold judicial integrity.
Thank you. I now call on the representative of the American Association of Jurists.
President, since the end of 2025, we've seen an increase in military operations by the US in the Caribbean Sea, affecting the sovereignty of states in the region, and has had direct consequences on the enjoyment of human rights of its populations. On 3rd January this year, there was a military operation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela without authorization of the Security Council, in contravention of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter and the principle of non-intervention. This included airstrikes, a land incursion, abduction of the constitutional president Nicolas Maduro and Deputy Cilia Flores in an act of war. It left more than 100 victims dead, civilians and military, provoking forced displacement of thousands of families from residential areas. There was also attacks on civil vessels in international waters in the Caribbean, leading to the death of more than 100 people, in addition to acts of looting, expropriation of vessels and possible disappearance of their crews. These actions are grave violations of the UN Charter, of the Geneva Conventions, of the Rome Statute, of the ICC. We call on OHCHR, special rapporteurs, independent experts, to give immediate attention to this situation, to request information on the condition of President Maduro and Deputy Flores and of the disappeared crews, and for them to consider dispatching a mission to verify the detention conditions under their respective mandates. Selectivity when it comes to accountability should be addressed by this Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Tamil Style. I give the floor to the representative of Association pour la lutte contre la contrainte et l'injustice. I give the floor to the representative of Mirza Zarqa.
President, addressing human rights situations in conflict contexts requires a firm commitment to objectivity and credibility, ensuring that the protection of civilians and the promotion of rights remain at the forefront, away from the instrumentalization of these issues in political disputes or exchanges of accusations. It has been observed in some discussions that accusations are directed from one state to another without sufficient evidentiary basis, which contributes to politicizing debates and negatively affects the objectivity of the work of the Human Rights Council. The use of human rights platforms to advance unsubstantiated or politically driven allegations not only weakens confidence in the Council's work, but also threatens the neutrality of its mechanisms and undermines its ability to effectively address humanitarian and human rights challenges in an objective manner.
A responsible international response also requires reliance on accurate, verifiable information and credible sources, thereby preventing the Council from being drawn into political polarization and ensuring that efforts are directed toward protecting civilians and supporting practical solutions rather than deepening divisions. Accordingly, we stress the importance of maintaining the objective and non-politicized character of addressing human rights situations and reaffirm our rejection of the use of the Council as a platform for settling political scores through allegations not grounded in sufficient evidence. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of ASDH.
Monsieur le Président, le Global Humanitarian
President, the Global Humanitarian Overview published by OCHA for 2026 confirms that 239 million people need urgent humanitarian aid this year, while response plans only target 135 million people with financing needs of over $3 billion. These figures reveal a major gap between the level of suffering and available resources. This unprecedented deterioration resulting from a convergence of armed conflicts, climate change and economic fragility are no longer temporary crises, but grave human rights situations affecting the right to life, dignity, food, health and housing. The persistent financing gap further reduces vital assistance, exacerbating avoidable violations of fundamental rights. In that context, we welcome the efforts of donor countries, including of the UAE, whose humanitarian aid to development has exceeded $100 billion at global level, which has continued to support the UN system, particularly through direct contributions in response to regional crises. However, the scope of the current crisis requires greater international commitment, reducing the financing gap, full respect for IHL, protection for humanitarian personnel, and guarantee of safe, non-discriminatory access to assistance. To deal with this situation is a legal moral obligation to protect human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Socialist International. I give the floor to the representative of Bahrain Jurist Society.
Mr. President, under item 4, the organizations wish to draw attention to recent attacks carried out in the GCC countries, including the Kingdom of Bahrain. As Bahrain has been subjected recently to more than 105 missile and more than 176 drones attacks launched by Iran. These attacks targeted several civilians' locations, including residential buildings in Manama, Jafir, Muharraq, and Sitra, as well as civilians' infrastructure such as Bahrain International Airport, installations near Salman ports, water desalination facility, university, and hotels. These attacks caused death and injuries among civilians, including women and children, in both Bahrain and other GCC countries, as well as property damage. Mr. President, such attacks raise serious concern under international law, as customary international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions require the protection of civilians and civilians' objects, and establish the principle of distinction, proportionality, and precaution in the conduct of hostilities. More importantly, these attacks violate Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. Therefore, the organizations urge the Council to give urgent attention to the human rights implication of these attacks and to take steps in condemning such acts of aggression against the sovereignty and civilian population of the GCC countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Women's Human Rights International Association.
Thank you, Mr. President. While Iran is grappling with the consequences of war and the bombardment of urban areas, evidence indicates that repressive apparatus of the Islamic Republic is using wartime state of emergency as a cover for political purges. Military and law enforcement officials of the regime have used explicit language to place domestic protest in the category of wartime military target. Ahmad Reza, the commander-in-chief of Iran's law enforcement command, remarks broadcast early on the 11th March on state television that border and police forces are in full readiness with their fingers on the triggers, emphasizing that any internal movement will face a decisive response. This statement highlights a familiar pattern in the Iranian authorities' official messaging, a warning that any unrest will be suppressed through the lethal use of force. We are deeply concerned about the current situation as well as about the political prisoners currently detained in prisons across Iran. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Funda Latin.
Thank you. During its oral update, the OHCHR didn't condemn the military attack by the US against Venezuela, leading to the killing of 100 innocent people and left the civilian population in a state of vulnerability. We call on the members of this council to condemn categorically the abduction and arbitrary detention of the constitutional president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife and deputy, Celia Flores, who were forcibly transferred to a prison in the US for an illegal trial that neglected their diplomatic immunity. We also regret that the High Commissioner has not called for an end to UCMs applied illegally against the country. We recall that while the government of the US has relaxed measures in the favour of their oil companies, there is still a policy of economic pressure denying the people basic inputs and medication. We've documented the death of 172 people, the majority children with needs for transplants, affected by the illegal confiscation of Citgo, the company that financed medical assistance to patients with chronic diseases. This fact was also overlooked by the High Commissioner. We also note that sectors including political prisoners, so-called, carried out violence, left many victims that were in attacks, victims that were lynched and beheaded. The political conflict should be resolved through dialogue and not through violence. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Central Zagreb pour les droits de l'homme.
Monsieur le Président.
President, while the war involving Iran continues, the interior repression in the country has intensified. The authorities have imposed internet cut-offs and cut-off of communications. They've carried out arbitrary arrests and continued to hand down death sentences. Officials have said that any protests will be repressed by lethal force. Prisoners in Iran today face an extremely dangerous situation. Many have been detained in overcrowded prisons with limited access to food, to potable water or to medical care. The majority of political prisoners are denied contact with their families, and hundreds have been transferred to unknown places. Some detainees have been transferred to facilities controlled by the military forces, making us fear their use as human shields. Given the risk of grave violations and the inability of the authorities to ensure protection of the population, the conditions are in place to invoke the principle of the responsibility to protect. Zagros Center for Human Rights calls on the international community to act in keeping with that principle. Thank you.
Thank you. This was the last speaker on the list. With this last intervention, we have concluded the general debate under Agenda Item 4. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I understand that certain delegations have requested to exercise the right of reply in relation to statements made under Agenda Item 4. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey, and you have 3 minutes.
Mr. President, we would like to exercise our right of reply. We categorically reject all the provocative and baseless allegations against Turkey. The presence of the Turkish troops in the island is a basic security requirement for the Turkish Cypriot people. The presence of the Turkish peace forces prevents the recurrence of violence towards the Turkish Cypriot people and deter further Greek Cypriot atrocities. I would like to remind you that between 1963 and 1974, the Turkish Cypriots lived in the island in enclaves, comprising only 3% of the total area of the island. In reality,
the Turkish Cypriots lived in open-air prison conditions for 11 years. During that time, hundreds of Turkish Cypriot people have been killed, injured, and maimed by the Greek Cypriot militia or forcefully abducted, never to be seen or heard again. Turkey's timely intervention as a guarantor power in 1974 saved the Turkish Cypriot people from total annihilation. Regrettably today, the Turkish Cypriot people are still suffering under the burden of all-encompassing isolation, and they are being deprived of their basic human rights and freedoms. Therefore, once again, we are calling upon the international community to reaffirm the inherent rights of sovereign equality and equal international status of the Turkish Cypriot people so that they can take their rightful place on international platform. Lastly, an agreement on the island can only be reached between the two sides on the basis of sovereign equality and equal international status. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The DPRK delegation would like to exercise its right of reply to the statements by Japan, Slovenia, Spain, Czechia, Australia, Malta, Lithuania. We categorically reject their arrogant and unfounded allegations which constitute a great political provocation aimed at despicable purposes. The very countries that level such accusations are themselves plagued by systematic social evils and widespread human rights abuses, including racism, xenophobia, white supremacy, resurgence of neo-Nazism, hate crimes, mistreatment of migrants and refugees, and so on. As the so-called human rights campaigns of these Western countries against the DPRK intensify, our determination to protect and further strengthen the fundamental rights of our people to life, safety, and development will be met with clearer and bolder practical measures. History attests that Japan is a war criminal state with the worst record, having forcibly drafted more than 8.4 million Koreans and forcing 200,000 Korean women into sexual slaves for Imperial Japanese Army. Japan must bear in mind that the more it persists in such brazen behavior, the more it will remain in the international community as a shameless nation devoid of moral conscience, only adding to the burden of its historical crimes. We strongly urge Japan to take concrete measures to assume state responsibility through poignant remorse, sincere apology, and legal reparations for its heinous crimes against humanity. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to exercise its right of reply in response to the statement made by North Korea. Regarding matters related to history, every country and region should approach its own past with humility and engage with it sincerely. Japan has done so diligently, and the post-war trajectory of Japan as a peaceful nation is a testament to this commitment. For over 80 years, since the end of the war, Japan has consistently upheld democracy and human rights, contributing to peace and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific and beyond. The claims and figures cited by North Korea concerning Japan are unfounded and reflect a misrepresentation of the facts. In particular, referring to the comfort of women as sexual slave is not consistent with the facts and therefore should not be used. I thank you.
Thank you. I remind and call upon all speakers to uphold UN standards when referring to countries, to use the standard reference to a UN member state. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Mr. President, the implementation of the national security law has successfully safeguarded national sovereignty and security and ensured long-term stability and prosperity of Hong Kong, China. It's every sovereign state's inherent right to enact national security laws. China is no exception. For example, the United Kingdom has at least 14 pieces of national security legislation, including the Sweeping National Security Act of 2023. It's hypocritical of any country to demand another country to repeal its own national security law and leave it defenseless. Jimmy Lai's case was mentioned yesterday. I'm obliged to point out that he was defended by a team of lawyers of his own choice and received a fair trial for his offenses endangering national security. The court's verdict and sentence were published with detailed reasons for which he chose not to appeal. Lai has received appropriate treatment in custody and never made any complaint. Any suggestion that certain individuals should be immune from legal consequence for their illegal acts totally runs contrary to the spirit of the rule of law. All in all, we oppose the biased allegations concerning Hong Kong's situation, which have ignored the objective facts demonstrating our remarkable achievement. Mr. President, let me share with you some figures. Last year, Hong Kong was ranked the world's fierce economy, #1 in global IPO market rankings, and #1 as Asia's largest hedge fund hub and cross-boundary wealth management center. The common law system of Hong Kong is internationally renowned. Hong Kong was ranked the second most preferred state of arbitration worldwide last year. The judiciary exercised judicial power independently, fairly, impartially, and openly. Judgments of the Court of Final Appeal were cited as persuasive authorities in overseas common law jurisdictions on close to 50 occasions in the past 6 years. These are testament to the trust and confidence that businesses and people have in the freedom, stability, and the rule of law of Hong Kong. We will continue to safeguard national security and protect legitimate rights and interests of all individuals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
President, we're forced to exercise right of reply following the statement by a number of delegations. We note with regret that Article 4 of the agenda, Item 4, was deliberately being exploited by the Western countries for political score settling. This destructive practice undermines the foundations of the work of the Council and its international authority. The whole world is witnessing how arbitrarily the Europe, which flouts its European democratic values apparently, refuses its own previous ideals for the benefit of short-term interests and the hidden agenda. So here, where they talk about so much about freedom of speech, what you have is effectively censure. So they block out alternative points of view. They close independent media. In the Baltic countries, we see a storm of Russophobia and blatant discrimination towards Russian speakers, against which we see a more aggressive migration policy. Effectively, its goal is to chase out all Russians. Our fellow countrymen aren't allowed to teach their children in their native Russian tongue or have equal access to basic services, take part in regular processes. Thousands of them for years have been in a humiliating status of non-citizens, denied their basic rights. And the fast degrading situation in protecting the rights of human rights in Ukraine, we've spoken about many times. The flouting of human rights there is systematic. There's complete the Kiev regime continues to demonstrate inhumane treatment to the lives of regular citizens and flouts the norms of international law, conducting mass shelling of Russian towns and villages. In countries like Canada, you have sexual violence, human trafficking, harsh treatment of migrants. In Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Canada also, continuous scandals of unearthing facts of discrimination against native population. In Australia, there's systematic discrimination against Indigenous peoples And speaking of intolerance, we see the rearing of heads of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia in Spain, France, Germany. The latest acts, former Hitler supporters of all stripes find safe haven there. And in Canada, every subject serves the undivided attention of the Council out with its geopolitical context and should be addressed purely from the angle of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me once again remind and call upon all speakers to uphold UN standards when referring to countries using standard UN terminologies. And I now call on the next speaker, the distinguished representative of Cuba.
President, Cuba exercises its right to reply to respond to Lithuania. We're surprised that this country comes to this council to speak of the human rights situation in extensive list of nations. Our suggestion to the distinguished delegation of Lithuania is that instead of emitting opinions that no one asked for, they should be more concerned with the worrying situation in their own country. There's abundant evidence of this, and we're ready to present that evidence if necessary. For now, though, we will limit ourselves to making a call to returning to the path of respectful dialogue and just make a suggestion. If Lithuanians' interest is to contribute to the cause of human rights in other countries, if that's genuine and they want to do this respectfully, we invite that delegation that in its next intervention they should support the High Commissioner of Human Rights, who, in reference to the criminal economic blockade imposed by the United States against the Cuban people, now which has been stepped up with a brutal energy blockade, he emphasized that nothing can justify the strangling, the suffocation of a population. I conclude reiterating that Cuba does not interfere in the internal affairs of any country, but nor will we accept the interference of anyone in ours. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Mr. President, we take the floor in response to the statement made by Turkey. It is regrettable that Turkey has once again chosen to divert attention from its own record by leveling accusations against others. Lectures on double standards are particularly unconvincing when they come from a country whose actions continue to raise serious concerns regarding respect for international law and human rights. The occupying power, Turkey, once again seeks to justify its act of aggression in Cyprus. Such attempt cannot detract from its responsibility for the ongoing violations of human rights resulting from the continued occupation of part of the Republic of Cyprus. For 5 decades, this aggression has led to the forcible division of Cyprus, the displacement of Greek Cypriots from their homes, the unresolved fate of missing persons, the destruction of cultural heritage, the influx of illegal settlers, and the usurpation of property. No amount of unfounded allegations can alter the fact that Turkey remains an occupying power in violation of international law, the Charter of the UN, and the Treaty of Guarantee, which requires respect to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Cyprus. If Turkey genuinely seeks peace, it should begin by withdrawing its troops from Cyprus, abandoning its two-state policy, and committing to a settlement based on a bizonal bicommunal federation with political equality in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council. Mr. President, rather than leveling accusations, Turkey should address the concerns repeatedly expressed by the international community, including by ensuring respect for freedom of expression, ending the harassment of opposition leaders, and complying fully with the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. Respect for international law and international human rights law must begin at home. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has requested a second right of reply. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before exercising our second right of reply to Japan, my delegation would like to address the repeated failure of the Japanese delegation to adhere to the terminology recognized within the United Nations system. Throughout the history of the world wars, Japan stands alone as a criminal state that horrifically violated the dignity and fundamental rights of hundreds and thousands of women, including teenage girls, forcing them into sexual slavery on the battlefield. No other country in the world organized and maintained such a system of sexual slavery through state power, nor persistently denied its crimes against humanity for nearly 80 years. Japan can never evade its historical, legal, and moral responsibility for these atrocities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next, I also understand that the distinguished delegation of Turkey wishes for a second right of reply. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Mr. President, we would like to exercise our second right of reply here. It's indeed true that there is still an occupation in Cyprus, which is the occupation of the government of the now defunct Republic of Cyprus by the Greek Cypriots. In the 1960 Partnership Republic of Cyprus, which was established between the two political equals, namely Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, had only lasted for 3 years. In 1963, the Greek Cypriot side resorted to violence, and the Turkish Cypriots were expelled from all organs of the government and even from their homes by force of arms. As a result of this ethnic cleansing campaign directed at Turkish Cypriot people with the ultimate aim of eliminating all the Turkish Cypriots, United Nations peacekeeping forces was deployed in the island in 1964. When they made a final attempt in 1974 through a coup d'etat with the ultimate aim of enosis by eliminating all the Turkish Cypriot people, Turkey as a guarantor power intervened on the island to save the lives of the Turkish Cypriot people. Therefore, it is quite absurd to describe the subsequent presence of the Turkish troops in the island as occupation. Lastly, I would like to recall that none of the United Nations Security Council resolutions on Cyprus have ever referred to the legitimate intervention of Turkey and the presence of Turkish troops to further deter the Greek Cypriot atrocities on the island as occupation. I thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan for its second right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to exercise the second right of reply to the statement made by North Korea. Regarding a historical issue, we will not respond to each of them in detail at this time. However, we wish to reiterate that referring to comfort women as sex slaves is factually incorrect and should not be used. We believe that many countries in this assembly recognize that Japan has consistently pursued the path of peaceful nation since the end of the war, making contribution to global peace and prosperity, including through development cooperation, peacekeeping operations, and efforts to improve human rights and universal value. Japan intends to continue to contributing peace as a responsible member of the international community. I thank you.
Thank you. I wish to once again remind and call upon all speakers to uphold UN standards when referring to countries and to use standard UN terminologies. Okay, I recognize the delegation of China has requested the floor for a second right of reply. May it be clarified, is it in reference to any statements made after China's first right of reply?
yes, distinguished President will use the right reply to mention some member states who mentioned China during their statement.
First right of reply.
President, EU, the Czech Republic, Switzerland, UK, Japan, Iceland, Finland, Australia, Germany, and other countries and individual anti-China NGOs abuse the platform of the Council, fabricate false information.
Interrupt. The statements made after your first right of reply is not referred to in your opening remarks. So I would advise that you make a second right of reply in response to the statements made after your first right of reply.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Just now, some countries, when they mentioning the first round of right apply regarding Hong Kong, we have made detailed response. With regard to other countries, their statements and individual NGOs mentioning Xinjiang, Xizang, and Inner Mongolia, these issues, I'd like to reiterate that all the regions and the rights of all ethnic groups are protected. China have already presented a solemn position on the so-called Xinjiang assessment report. China's have stated the issues regarding Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Mongolia, and the basic rights and freedoms are all protected. At the same time, no exercise of freedom is absolute. When exercising these freedoms, they must follow the Constitution, and the law cannot harm the national, societal, and the collective interest. This is universal and in accordance with the spirit of human rights institutions. Relevant countries keep smearing developing countries.
Thank you. The right of reply that you have provided to the Council should have been during your first right of reply, because the reference you made to the NGOs, those were made before the session on right of reply. So thank you. So we have now concluded the consideration of agenda item 4. Now, before we come to a close, we have been approached by the sponsors of the following draft resolutions with a view to extending the deadline of submissions until Thursday, 19 March at 1 p.m. And those are on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and the obligation to ensure accountability and justice under agenda item 2. Next is the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination under agenda item 7. And next is the Israeli settlement in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan under agenda item 7. Explanations have been provided. With your approval, an extension of the tabling deadline for this draft resolution will be granted until Thursday, 19 March at 1 p.m. I take it that this is agreeable to all of you. Excellencies, distinguished participants, this brings us to the end of this meeting. We will reconvene in the afternoon at 2:30 p.m. to hold the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on minority issues, and then hear presentation of reports under agenda item 5, followed by general debate. And I now hereby close the 34th meeting of the 61st session of the Human Rights Council.